Welcome back to PrepBee, and we are doing day 27, CAT 2022, slot 3 passage. So let's get started with this. Interpretations of the Indian past were inevitably influenced by colonial concerns and interests, and also by prevalent European ideas about history, civilization, and the Orient. So, Western understandings of Indian history were shaped by colonial motivations and by European views of history, civilization, and the East. These interpretations were not neutral, they were tailored to serve the interest of the colonizers. All right. Orientalist scholars studied the language and the text within selected Indian scholars, but made little attempt to understand the worldview of those who were teaching them. The readings, therefore, are something of a disjuncture from the traditional ways of looking at the Indian past. So Orientalist scholars, they focused on learning Indian languages and texts through Indian scholars. They didn't try to understand the worldview or the cultural context of the Indians who taught them, which led to incomplete and distorted interpretations. As a result, the way Western scholars interpreted Indian history was disconnected from the traditional indigenous perspectives of the Indian people themselves. Orientalism, which we can understand broadly as Western perceptions of the Orient, fueled the fantasy and the freedom sought by European Romanticism, particularly in its opposition to the more disciplined neoclassicism. So, Orientalism contributed to European Romanticism, a movement that sought freedom and imagination, in contrast to the neoclassicism, which is the rigid discipline. So, European Romantic thinkers were drawn to the East as a source of inspiration. The cultures of Asia were seen as bringing a new romantic paradigm. Another renaissance was anticipated through an acquaintance with the Orient, and thus it was thought would be different from the earlier Greek renaissance. So, here what the author is trying to say is that romantic thinkers believed that engaging with Eastern cultures would lead to a new form of renaissance, a revival of art and culture, and that would be different from that of Greek. It was believed that the Oriental Renaissance would liberate European thought and literature from the increasing focus on discipline and rationality that had followed from the earlier Enlightenment. The Romantic English poets Wordsworth and Coleridge were apprehensive of the changes introduced by industrialization and turned to nature and to fantasies of the Orient. The idea was that the Oriental Renaissance would free European thought and art from the rigid discipline and rationality that had come to dominate the after Enlightenment period, offering more emotional and intuitive freedom. So poets like Wordsworth and a few others, they were concerned about the negative effects of industrialization on the society and nature. They sought solace and inspiration in the nature and in the imaginative allure of the Orient. However, this enthusiasm gradually changed to conform with the emphasis later in the 19th century on the innate superiority of the European civilization. So, over time, European attitudes shifted from fascination with the Orient to a more confident belief in the inherent superiority of their own civilization. Oriental civilization were now seen as having once been greatly but currently in decline. So now the glory has gone. The various phases of Orientalism tended to mold European understanding of the Indian past to a particular pattern. So the different stages of Orientalism shaped the way Europeans understood India's history, often reinforcing a fixed narrative or stereotype. There was an attempt to formulate Indian culture as uniform, such formulations being derived from texts that were given priority. The so-called discovery of India was largely through selected literature in Sanskrit. So European scholars often try to present Indian culture as uniform, unchanging, based on the selected texts that were given more importance than others, which led to a simplified view of India. Western knowledge of India was often framed as discovery through key Sanskrit texts, which were considered to reveal the Indian essence. This interpretation tended to emphasize non-historical aspects of Indian culture. For example, the idea of unchanging continuity of society and religion over 3,000 years. And it was believed that the Indian pattern of life was so concerned with metaphysics and some subtitles of religious beliefs that little attention was given to more tangible aspects. So the interpretation of India by Orientalists often ignored the historical developments and instead they portrayed it as a society that is unchanging in their religious and cultural continuity. So Indian society was often depicted as overly focused on abstract spirituality and religious philosophy, and little attention was given to practical aspects of politics or economics or anything that is more tangible. German Romanticism endorsed this image of India and it became the mystic land for many Europeans, where even the most ordinary actions were imbued with a complex um, symbolism. So, German Romantic thinkers they embraced this portrayal of India as a mystic land where everyday actions had deep symbolic meanings. This was the genesis of the idea of the spiritual East, and also, incidentally, the refuge of European intellectuals seeking to distance themselves from the changing patterns of their own society. So, the idea of the spiritual East was born out of this, with India and other Eastern societies seen as havens for spiritual depth and simplicity. European intellectuals that is illusioned by the changes in their own societies, they sought refuge in these romanticized views of East. And dictomine values was maintained, Indian values being described as spiritual and European as materialistic, with little attempt to juxtapose these values with the reality of the Indian society. So sharp distinction was made. Indian values were spiritual, European were materialistic. However, this oversimplified view ignored the complexity of both the societies. This theme has even more firmly endorsed by a section of Indian opinion during the last 100 years. So, in the past century, some sections of Indian intellectuals have embraced this dichotomy, which served as a way to cope with the perceived technical and cultural superiority of the West. It was a consolation to the Indian intelligentsia for its perceived inability to counter the technical superiority of the West, a superiority viewed as having enabled Europe to colonize Asia and other parts of the world. So we have spiritual, superiority. So it was seen as a consolation for Europeans' technical ones. At the height of anti-colonial nationalism, it acted as a salve for having been made of a colonial Britain. So during the peak anti-colonial sentiment in India, this idea of spiritual strength, it was served as a balm for the wounds inflicted by the British colonial rule, and it fostered resistance and pride among them. All right, very beautiful passage. So let's see the questions now. It can be inferred from the passage to gain a more accurate view of the nation's history and culture. Scholars should do all of the following exam. Develop an oppositional framework to grasp cultural differences. Do they need to develop an oppositional framework to grasp differences? Not really necessary. Let's see other. Examine the complex reality, yes. Read widely in the country's literature, yes. Examine their own beliefs and biases, yes. It can be inferred from the passage that the author is not likely to support the view that Orientalist view of Asia fired the imagination of some Western poets. It is given in the first paragraph itself. Indian culture acknowledges the material aspects of life. It does. Indian culture has evolved. Yes, it has evolved. India became a colony, although it matched the technical knowledge, it did not. And that was a consolation that was worked with Horn. All right. Which of the following styles of research is most similar to the Orientalist scholars' method of understanding Indian culture? And this one. Reading about life of early American settlers and later waves of migration to understand the evolution of American culture. Now, Orientalist views was what कोई एक चीज ले लिया और उसका मतलब उसको देख के they were like यही सब कुछ है. Where it is, let me just say. They made little attempt to understand the world view of those who were teaching them. कुछ scholars से पूछ लिया, वो जान लिया, कुछ languages के text देख ली, but world view क्या है उस text का, they did not try to understand. So that is about this one. So very narrow, shallow view. Early life of American settlers की बातें नहीं हो रही. Reading 18th century accounts to see how they viewed Indian life and culture. Reading 18th century accounts by travelers to see. Studying artifacts excavated at a place to understand the lifestyle of those who lived there. Analyzing Hollywood action movies that depict violence and sex to understand contemporary India. कोई सेंस ही नहीं बनता है इसका कि तुमने ये देख के सी दिस आर ऑल मेकिंग सेंस 18th सेंचुरी हो गया अकाउंट्स हो गया आर्टिफैक्ट्स हो गया ठीक है तुमने चलो अर्ली लाइफ के बारे में पढ़ लिया दैट इज ऑल्सो स्टिल मेकिंग सेंस बट यहाँ पे फोर्थ वाला नॉट रियली all of this, what is the false statement that you need to identify? Orientalist scholarship influenced Indians, it did. Indian text influenced, it did. India's spiritualism served as a salve for European colonizers. India's spiritualism served as a salve for this one. At the height of anti-colonial nationalism, it served as a salve for having been made a colony of Britain. It did not serve for European colonizers. It is the other way around. Now let's do this one. This has meant a lot of uncertainty around what a wide-scale return to office might look like in practice. Bringing workers back to their desk has been rocky road for employers and employees alike. The evolution of the pandemic has meant the best laid plans have often not materialized. The flow of workers back into the office has been more of a trickle than a steady storm. तो ये इसका flow बन रहा है, so option 1 तो नहीं आएगा. Yet, while plenty of companies are still working through their new policies, some employees across the globe are now back at their desk, whether on full-time or hybrid basis. That means, so ये भी continue flow बन रहा है. That means we are beginning clarity on what of return to office means, what's working as well as what has yet to be settled. This has meant a lot of uncertainty. यहाँ पे कोई सेंस नहीं बनता है ये सीधा सेकंड पे जाएगा कि it is more of a storm and this has meant a lot of uncertainty in the world. So 2 is your answer. Now, when people socially learn from each other, they often learn without understanding why what they are coping, the beliefs and behaviors and technologies and know-how looks. The dual inheritance theory says, introduce कर रहा है तो यहाँ पे तो नहीं आएगा. That inheritance is itself an evolutionary system. It has variation. What makes us new kind of animal and so different and successful as species is we rely heavily on social learning to the point where socially acquired information is effectively a second line of inheritance. The first being our genes. When people socially learn from each other, they often learn. So यहाँ पे थोड़ा आ सकता है क्योंकि social learning की ही बात हो रही है. People tend to home in on who seems to be the smartest or most successful around, as well as what everybody seems to be doing. The majority of people are having something worth living. When you repeat this process, continuation है यहाँ पे नहीं आएगा. Over time, you can get around the world cultural package beliefs or behaviors or technology or other solutions that are adapted to local conditions. People have different psychologies effectively. When people socially learn, यहाँ पे तो नहीं आएगा flow ही टूट रहा है. यहाँ पे socially learn करने की बात हुई है, यहाँ पे flow बन जाएगा. So second is your answer. So that's it for today. We hope to see you soon.